Lesale Deathbringer the Venomancer will drive you bananas with his toxicity. By utilizing his arsenal of noxious spittle, he's going to take his sweet time to make sure his enemies suffer. It's in my nature to tell you the history of
Venomancer.
Venomancer is a ranged agility hero who focuses on dealing magic damage over time and slowing his enemies, ensuring their demise through sheer agony. His first ability is Venomous Gale. This launches a ball of venom in a line, poisoning enemy units that come in contact with it. The ball will deal magic damage on impact, as well as ticking additional damage every few seconds. The victim will also be slowed over the duration, although it slowly tapers off over time. A strong spell at any stage of the game, Venomous Gale can deal serious damage through its DOT, and the slow basically immobilizes any unit unlucky enough to get hit. Following this is Poison Sting, a passive that adds poison damage to all of Venomancer's basic attacks, which, like Venomous Gale, deals magic damage over time and slows the target's movement speed. This allows Venomancer to rack up the DOT and slow effects on his targets, and generally bug the hell out of everyone he can get his goo on. Poison Sting is by no means a big flashy finisher. Instead, it weakens the enemy over a prolonged period, and they'll have simply no choice but to deal with the corrosive beatdown. His third spell is Plague Ward. This summons a ward at a target location that can attack hostile units and structures. It also has the added benefit of applying Poison Sting to its targets, although it only deals 50% of the full damage. A highly versatile spell, Plague Wards can be used to help take down a tower, protect against an oncoming siege, deny an area of a fight, and they can even act as makeshift vision wards that also slow enemies who walk by. The perfect mix of helpful and irritating, kind of like an overachieving teacher's pet. The Venomancer's ultimate is Poison Nova. This spreads a ring of poison around Venomancer, dealing magic damage over a long time. So more of the same from this spell, with the notable exception that the damage from Poison Nova is not lethal. So if an enemy happens to walk away while affected by the ultimate and nothing else, they'll always have at least 1 health. Luckily, you have 3 other methods of pinging your opponents with additional damage over time, and also teammates, I guess? So it's not like escape is going to be easy. Poison Nova is an excellent initiation to a fight, immediately deterring the enemy from wanting to engage, and when combined with the slows from Venomancer's other spells, victory is just a matter of waiting out the clock. Despite Valve implementing heavier crackdown on negative behavior, you can be as toxic as you want with the Venomancer. And if you like the idea of playing as a sadistic snake, why don't you slither on over and subscribe to my channel? I would love to hit 100,000 subs, and every little bit of support helps. You can also join as a member of the channel to be featured on the Wall of Tall at the end of every video, and you'll also have access to fun emojis like Juggernaut's head or a hand of Midas to use in the comment section. I know my friend Lesale is going to support the channel, right?
Yes.
Oh, I had a feeling. Anyway, back to the show. The Sinister Serpent came into the world of Dota, starting with the original maps made by Yule sometime in 2002. Here, he used the modified Hydralisk model, an early Zerg unit from StarCraft who's most known for spitting acid and evolving into the much cooler Lurker. Venomancer's first name, Lesale, may refer to the French word
le sale,
which translates to the dirty or the nasty. His description upon picking him calls him a putrid being to the core. The Venomancer excels at damage over time attacks. He is also capable of damaging multiple units at once. Excellent offensive caster. His original spells mirror his current skill set pretty closely, with Decompose being a single target spell dealing damage over time to units and structures, and Plague Spear acting as a primitive version of Poison Sting, although it only did a puny 6 damage per second. He also had a nuke in Carrion Swarm, a basic Warcraft 3 spell that deals magic damage in a cone. And his original ultimate was Epidemic. This was a passive that deals 10 damage per second in an area around Venomancer. Essentially, it's a radiance that uses fart gas. At its core, Yule's version of Venomancer definitely laid the groundwork for the hero in future patches to come, but the low damage values across the board make his venom feel more like a mild itch. In the transition to Ginsu's Dota All-Stars, Venomancer belonged to the original cast of heroes in the very first version. Although he's looking a little different here. Did he get a new haircut or something?
Look closer, Denny.
He first hailed onto the scene as the Ancient Hydra, and uses the same title with his hero description calling him a ranged hero, but his skills did get jumbled around a bit. Be aware that Venomancer is a strength hero in this iteration, and he has Poison Sting and Shadow Strike, upgraded forms of Plague Spear and Decompose, both of which deal noticeably more damage. Shadow Strike was actually shared with Queen of Pain, and they work identically. It was a single target spell that dealt damage and slowed an enemy for a long time. As a new addition to his arsenal, the Ancient Hydra had Reinforced Skin, a passive spell that added armor. And his ultimate was Reincarnation, which revives him when killed. But you probably already guessed that through context. I trust you guys, I don't gotta dumb it down for you. It seems like the game plan here revolved around dealing damage over time, but like, do it for a while. You would take advantage of his natural bulk, armor, and second life to stick around for as long as humanly possible to agitate your enemies with your DOT spells. Venomancer switched back over to the Hydralisk model and his original agility primary attribute in version 2.60. In version 4.0, Reincarnation would be replaced with Poison Nova, and in this original form, the spell would also slow attack speed and movement speed of enemies that were affected, making it a whole lot scarier and way more functional with the rest of his skills. Version 5.10 replaced Reinforced Skin with Plague Ward. The ward is pretty similar to the current day version, except it didn't apply Poison Sting, and its bounty at level 4 ranged from 28 to 44 gold, so placing these willy-nilly is like littering the streets with quarters covered in acid. On the bright side, the wards also came with a passive called Disease Cloud, which affected a small radius around the ward, dealing magic damage per second to enemy units. I could go on and on about how much I love this passive, but long story short, I think this would work well even in today's meta. Plague wards can admittedly feel weak at times, but having a tiny fart cloud around the little guys can make their placements feel more impactful, especially when you're trying to chase someone down. With that foundation in place, I can now tell you that 5.1 also updated Venomancer's bio, calling him a ranged hero, proficient with poison skills. In 5.34, Poison Nova damage is no longer lethal, a change that would persist even to this day. Flavor-wise, it doesn't really check out. I mean, can anyone actually explain to me why this damage isn't lethal using in-universe logic? But as far as gameplay goes, this just made tagging enemies with your Poison Sting that much more crucial, and it balanced the spell in a way that made it more than just a set it and forget it option. In 5.40, Venomancer received his first Aghanim Scepter upgrade. This would simply increase Poison Nova's damage and reduce its cooldown. In 5.61b, Plague Ward had the Disease Cloud passive removed, a truly sad changelog as Plague Ward wouldn't have any extra fun utility for quite some time thereafter. 5.72 offered a fix to a uniquely janky situation. Venomancer's base regeneration type changed from only regenerate at Blight to always regenerate. Where do I begin? So in Warcraft 3, undead units had a unique trait where they could only regenerate while they're standing on blighted terrain. This would spawn from certain buildings, and adding more buildings on the blight would extend its radius. So because Venomancer used the Hydralisk model, he was classified as an undead unit, meaning that he suffered from this unfortunate hindrance because blighted terrain was used as an aesthetic choice to decorate the Scourge's side of the map. Consequently, this means that choosing Venomancer on the Sentinel side puts you at a disadvantage because it only calculates the HP regen from his stats. So with this patch, that whole interaction went away. Thank goodness. In 6.00, Poison Nova no longer slows unit movement speed and attack speed, and was recoded to fix various bugs, such as multiple instances of the spell not being able to stack, properly hitting all units within range, and no longer dealing random damage to units passing through the effect. I only bring this up because it seems like these so-called fixes would screw up a bunch of other effects not soon after. Before I get into that though, in 6.05, Venomancer received an updated description. For those obsessed with death, poison is a necessary study. However, Lesale went a step too far. He experimented upon himself with various toxins and chemicals so that he could learn the secrets of death. These twisted his mind and mutated his body into a hideous creature which embodies an immense hatred for all things pure. This premise would inspire Venomancer's Dota 2 lore, so keep it in your back pocket for now. In 6.06, Venomancer was restricted from buying Refresher Orb. Looks like it was due to bugs, according to the patch notes. In 6.09, the restriction was lifted, although it comes with a caveat that Poison Nova's debuff still doesn't stack. This leads me to believe that they somehow fixed the multiple sources stacking back in 6.00, but a bunch of spaghetti code prevented this from working properly, so the easiest solution was to make the spell not stack at all. In the following patch, 6.10 reduced Poison Nova's damage per second, but increased the duration to 12 seconds, which overall did pretty similar damage. It raised the skill ceiling a little bit as less damage was dealt up front, meaning that the enemy has a higher chance of surviving the damage over time. The Aghanim Scepter damage was also adjusted here, although it dealt the same damage overall. Things would stay stable for a long while, with only minor balance changes occupying the patch notes, most notable of which was a change in 6.42 where Plague Ward's bounty was reduced to a range of 3 to 9 gold. That big of a jump made the skill so much more bothersome, as it may not even be worth the time, damage, and slow you would endure to pick up essentially the amount of gold you can make in a few seconds. The last major change of this era occurred in 6.58, where Shadow Strike got kicked to the curb in favor of Venomous Gale. I've already covered the basics of the spell, so I won't bother to repeat myself here, but this is easily an upgrade over Shadow Strike. You lose out on the consistency of a single target spell, but the range and radius of Venomous Gale makes it easy to hit multiple targets on cast, so you could impact a teamfight a whole lot more than if you just stuck to one opponent. Not only that, but it meshed better with Poison Nova, as you can tag more people and mark them for death. This patch also made Poison Sting damage lethal, so you're not just relying on Venomous Gale to finish people off. With that, Venomancer would cement his identity as a huge nuisance who could infect an entire team. Evolving from a multi-headed Hydra to a scary danger noodle, the Venomancer truly had what it took to be incredibly obnoxious. Heroes of Newerth ported Venomancer over as Slither, who was part of their initial cast of heroes in April 2009. Slither obviously takes a lot of design cues from Venomancer. He's a bipedal reptile of some sort whose perpetually unhinged jaw looks reminiscent of a poison-type Gyarados. His lore tells us that he's the Serpent of the Seventh Pit, feeder on the sick and the weak, was summoned forth in the last days of the war between man and beast. A cunning conniver and whisperer of false promises, Slither delights in suffering and despair. His voice work isn't anything to marvel at. He sounds like what you'd expect from a snake character. He's sneaky, devious, and of course, he talks with a hissing lisp.
Oh, are you bidding? Pick your poison. Excellent! Sinister!
Slither was originally a direct port of Venomancer, with the skills called Poison Spray, Toxin Ward, Toxicity, and Poison Burst, with the Staff of the Master's upgrade changing his ultimate to Toxic Burst. There's a couple of fun references in the flavor text of these spells. Toxin Ward says "Feed me Seymour," which alludes to the Little Shop of Horrors. Great musical, by the way. And Toxicity says "Get down with the sickness," which is also the title of a song by a band named Disturbed, also known as the third best AMV song after Headstrong and Remember the Name. Slither innovates on the Venomancer gameplay with a couple of crucial differences in his Toxin Ward. First off, his wards work off of a charge system, and he can hold up to 2 charges at a time. Sounds inconsequential at first, but when you're in desperation mode and trying to farm the jungle, having 2 of these guys right away really speeds things up. More importantly, these little critters also have a distinct effect where their attacks increase the duration of all of Slither's abilities by 1 second. This is such an amazing effect with smart design that I'm pretty envious of the creativity at play. Because of the whole slowing enemies down thing that he's got going on with his other spells, it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get at least a couple of hits off with the ward, not to mention that you can lay 2 of them at a time, resulting in you extending the damage over time effects longer than anyone would expect. What we have on Venomancer right now is pretty balanced, so it's my fear that he might dominate a bit too much with these effects. But if Dota 2 ever gets to the point where it's being power crept to hell, I think either of Toxin Ward's traits would be a great addition to Lesale's arsenal. Now that I've spooged over Slither's wards, I would also like to mention that his alternate avatar, Rift Slither, which changes his model to that of a creature that is totally not a Hydralisk. Wink. Also a, neat avatar is MS Ivy Slither, who was designed by the team Fnatic MSI. She's a Poison Ivy-like character with voice lines to match.
Your desire is my command. You like that, don't you?
Oh god, is anyone else getting a little sweaty? On the Heroes of the Storm front, we've got a couple of honorable mentions, starting with Lunara. She's more of a DPS character, but her passive, Nature's Toxin, applies a poison onto her targets when she attacks or hits them with a damaging ability. Of course, the poison deals damage over time and it stacks, which is great because her W, Crippling Spores, extends the poison's duration and slows the targets affected by her passive for a short time when activated, mimicking Venomancer's plan of attack with the damage over time mixed with slows. Her third spell named Wisp spawns a wisp to scout an area which effectively acts as a ward. You can think of this as Lunara's version of Plague Ward, and although it doesn't do anything offensively, it's a good way to defend against a gank or to plan ahead while chasing an enemy. And while there isn't a Hydralisk hero necessarily, Zagara has a spell called Hunter Killer, which summons a Hydralisk to attack a target over a few seconds. Technically, this is a different strain of Hydralisk that doesn't quite match the one in the Warcraft 3 client, but if you care about that sort of thing, you might be a giant dork! For League of Legends, we have a few notable mentions. If you want to satiate the DOT and slowing gameplay, look no further than these two rodents, Teemo and Twitch. Yeah, like it or not, Teemo fulfills the niche of the magic damage over time with his third skill, Toxic Shot, as well as his ultimate, Noxious Trap, which also happens to slow. Teemo is more about the mental warfare, baiting your opponent into bad situations by blinding them, luring them into mushrooms, and using his high movement speed to kite his opposition around. Twitch, on the other hand, relies on his ambush spell to go invisible and get the jump on his targets. His innate passive, Deadly Venom, applies a stacking DOT that deals true damage, and his Venom Cask applies a stack of Deadly Venom per second in addition to slowing the enemy. I have a feeling that I'll bring these guys up again when I talk about Viper, but either way, these two champions are sure to let you fulfill your toxic ambitions in more ways than one. Now, if you like the Plague Ward aspect of Venomancer, let me turn your attention to the Rise of the Thorns. Zyra's main mechanic revolves around storing seeds and sprouting them with her other abilities. The seeds themselves grant slight vision wherever they're planted, and can grow either into a Thorn Spitter or Vine Lasher. The Thorn Spitter has more range, but the Vine Lasher can slow enemies on hit, so there's a small bit of decision making that's important to master to play Zyra well. Not only that, but Zyra has a Poison Ivy inspired look, which means that she has a visual connection to MS Ivy Slither. Okay, come on, no one else is sweaty right now? Venomancer slid his way into Dota 2 as part of the initial batch of heroes debuting during the International 1 tournament in August 2011. His initial appearance has the same basic premise as a Hydralisk, except he's skinnier and has a lime green hue, possibly to match the Toxin theme. Because of his color and overall shape, he was often compared to a banana, with super duper clever players referring to him as the Bananamancer. His model received an update on November 21st, 2013, where he resembles a hooded cobra with two pairs of piercing red eyes, giving him a much needed threatening presence. He also lost those little hands, which, while cute, didn't really seem intimidating at all. On that note, Venomancer has some absolutely fascinating concept art, showing different interpretations of his lore which we'll get into later. While the model we got isn't bad by any means, the designs we didn't are textbook definitions of body horror, which I think deserve some admiration. They demonstrate the idea of a man merging with the surroundings of the acid jungles a lot better, but they most likely wouldn't translate well in-game. His beta icons don't really add much to the conversation, but if someone went through the trouble of drawing Sting in Microsoft Paint, then I'm more than happy to bring it to everyone's attention. Venomancer's lore combines both his origin story, as well as a general warning to not mess with him. In the acid jungles of GD Isle, poison runs in the veins and bubble in the guts of every creature that scuttles, climbs, or swoops between fluorescent vines dripping with caustic sap. Yet even in this toxic menagerie, Venomancer is acknowledged as the most venomous. Ages ago, an herbalist named Lesale crossed the Bay of Frage by Coracle, searching for essences that might be extracted from bark and root, and found instead a nightmare transformation. 2 leagues into GD's jungle, Lesale encountered a reptile camouflaged as an epiphyte, which stung him as he mistakenly plucked it. In desperation, he used his partial knowledge of the jungle's herbal bounty, mixing the venom of the swiftly throttled reptile with the nectar of an armored orchid to compound an antidote. In the moments before a black paralysis claimed him completely, he injected himself by Orchid Thorn and instantly fell into a coma. 17 years later, something stirred in the spot where he had fallen, throwing off the year's accumulation of humus, Venomancer. Lesale the herbalist no longer, but Lesale the Deathbringer. His mind was all but erased, and his flesh had been consumed and replaced by a new type of matter, one fusing the venom of the reptile with the poisonous integument of the orchid. GD's acid jungles knew a new master, one before whom even the most vicious predators soon learned to bow or burrow for their lives. The lurid isle proved too confining, and some human hunger deep in the heart of the Venomancer drove Lesale out in search of new poisons, and new deaths to bring. His voice responses characterize him as cunning and hell-bent on infecting the world with his venom. Since Lesale came out so early, it doesn't seem like Valve nailed down his motivations or relationships, so most of what he has to say involves some synonym for the word venom.
Ah, sweet toxicity. Death is the only antidote. With vim and venom. I only wanted to kill everyone.
Venomancer only has a handful of cosmetics with any significant lore implications. Of the items that have descriptions, the Fatal Bloom acts as a what-if scenario, as it depicts Venomancer if the cocoon that he slept in also hosted a Phrygian moth. Turns out, it makes him look beautiful. The splattering Forcipule looks like a carnivorous plant that attacks nearby wildlife, which most of the time takes them out. Wherever the victim falls, the toxins quickly dissolve their body into the dirt below, where the wiggly ward absorbs their remains for nutrients. The Venoling Courier sadly says how shortly after Lesale the Herbalist's disappearance in the acid jungles of GD, his bold yet diminutive nephew went looking for his uncle and found a similar fate. Although it's tragic that someone presumably young mutated in such a horrific way, the implication that Lesale's nephew seemingly had the same amount of knowledge on the subject matter is truly impressive. The Cult of Aktok has a side story of a time when Venomancer had been injured after a fight. He slid into an area underground to recover, which turned out to be a place of worship for a being named Aktok. Worshippers found Venomancer there and mistook him as a herald of their lord. Venomancer was more than happy to receive their offerings, and once he had been healed to full, he would follow the shamans back to their village and consume everyone there. Last but not least, Venomancer has a taunt called the Banana Dancer. It has him spit out a banana, and he does a fun little jig with it. This is a callback to his old model, the aforementioned Bananamancer. And if you can't get enough of the slimy predator, you can always pick up a micro plush and a demi-hero figure of him. Infect your desk with style today! Venomancer shows up in Artifact as a blue hero unit. He's got relatively low stats on his body, but he comes with Venomous Nature as his passive, which summons a Plague Ward into his lane every turn. His signature card is Sow Venom, which succinctly summons 2 Plague Wards. The wards themselves deal 2 piercing damage to a random enemy neighbor before the action phase, so the gameplay idea is to swarm the lane and opt in for a go wide strategy, while your other heroes take down the other lanes. Venomancer doesn't have much lore impact in the game. He doesn't reference other characters, and they don't reference him. So what's interesting is that his goals largely remain the same. That is, he's still very focused in spreading his venom wherever he goes, except the writers have added in a personality quirk where he refers to his Plague Wards as his daughters, and affectionately speaks about them in a parent-child manner. Not only that, but he brings up his garden on multiple occasions, and these traits do a good job of adding some personality to his character.
My daughters are creations of purpose, and together we will spread a delicious poison across this countryside, purging it of weakness and stupidity. I like to take time when placing my creations, ensuring that each of my daughters has a chance to blossom into what they are destined to become. To die in my garden is an honor. Within my garden, I am sovereign.
In Underlords, Venomancer is a tier 1 hero who's part of the Scaled, Summoner, and Poisoner alliances. His ability is Plague Ward, of course, and his upgrade path is based on the Acid Hydra set. There's not much more to add here. His voice responses carry on the theme established in Artifact, in that he calls his Plague Wards his children, and thinks of his creeping domain as his garden.
My wicked garden will grow. Protect me, and my children will protect you. My children will thrive in White Spire.
Venomancer has gone through a fair number of meaningful changes in Dota 2, starting with 6.79, in which both Venomous Gale and Poison Nova no longer ignore invisible units or units in the Fog of War. I think this one just makes sense. It's not as though Poison lacks object permanence and you can just avoid it by hiding. Poison Sting damage also no longer dispels consumables or Blink Dagger. This is a nerf I agree with. It's super busted to disable a blink or regeneration for 12 seconds just by attacking the enemy once. The most monumental change happened to Plague Ward, where it now applies the current level of Poison Sting for 50% of the damage. If the Ward and Venomancer attack the same target, the one with the stronger damage, i.e. Venomancer's, will be applied. This is such a good way to add utility to the spell without making it overpowered. Perfect for harassing or to attempt a clutch kill on an enemy, this change adds a lot of synergy between Lesale's abilities. In 6.82, Poison Nova can now place its debuff on spell immune enemies. Do note that the spell immunity will prevent the damage from happening, but as soon as it's off, the enemy will continue to take damage from the spell. This one's just kind of a cool quality of life improvement. I think it serves more as a way to prevent feel-bad situations by allowing Poison Nova to do its thing, rather than seeing your ultimate get dispelled right away. In 6.85, Poison Sting now fully works with illusions, in case you wanted to go Manta style for some reason. Poison Nova's numbers were also modified here, reducing the damage per second, but increasing the duration to 16 seconds at each level. This is an overall damage buff, so it's not too shabby. His Aghanim Scepter was also adjusted to increase the Poison Nova damage per second, but it no longer increases the duration since those numbers on his ult were already affected in this patch. In 7.00, Venomancer received his first set of talents, which don't really matter for the most part, except for the level 25 one that increases Plague Ward's health and attack damage by 3 times the amount. This is a real game ender, and it can't be stressed enough how strong this is, even in the late game. 7.07 updated his talents with most of them affecting his skills directly, with the level 21 being a real highlight. Venomous Gale summoning 2 Plague Wards around heroes hit is a great way to add some pressure into a team fight. The fact that it's locked behind level 20 gives it a good semblance of balance, so it's a powerful pickup without creating too much havoc. In 7.23, Poison Sting applied a 30% health regen reduction to affected targets. This had a gigantic impact in the laning phase, where tangos and general HP regen is vital to winning. Cutting the effectiveness of the regen by 30% was instrumental in making Venomancer a giant problem child in this patch. It was quickly nerfed in 7.23c and removed entirely in 7.27b, which made me quite the sad boy. Finally, in 7.28, Venomancer received his first Aghanim Shard upgrade. This would take the old talent that causes Venomous Gale to spawn 2 Plague Wards and place the effect directly onto this item. The corresponding talent also changed to make up for this, and I'd like to think that this change is good in the long run. Gatekeeping this behind the 20-minute mark and a 1400 gold item makes you have to weigh the opportunity cost of the items you'd be delaying. As far as the design space for shard upgrades go, I like this one a ton, and it sets a solid precedent for what makes a good Aghanim Shard effect. And so we've seen the development of the Venomancer. Where he was once a beefy nuisance, he's really come into his own as a corrosive cad. Throughout the years, Venomancer really has shown us that when it comes to torturing his enemies, he's truly the best at driving his enemies bananas. Thank you to the members of the Wall of Tall for supporting the channel. If you would like to be featured here, you can join through channel memberships, subscribe to me on Twitch, or support through Patreon. Last time I asked, come up with an Elder Dragon form. The responses to this were absolutely amazing, and it was really fun to read through all your comments. A lot of you went with the Weeb route and came up with the Blue Eyes White Dragon. This is exactly what I expected from my audience. The Purple or Void Dragon was another popular response, and they all played with some kind of gravity or space theme. And lastly, it looks like everyone wanted Davian to turn into a pink dragon, portraying the ancient half-dragon hybrid as cute as possible. That's all I've got for now, but please follow me on Twitter and Instagram while you're at it. See you soon!